All right, it's 1 o'clock Eastern Time. We're going to get started. My name is Dave McCormick, and I'm pleased to be joined today by Dion McCormick, no relations, our lead solutions engineer. Today we'll be talking about Alpha Anywhere. We'll be going over a demo of some of the features that are there, but more importantly, we are here to answer your questions. So please go ahead and start submitting your questions now, if you have any, to the questions box of the GoToWebinar interface, and we'll be happy to take them on. So let me just unmute Dion here. Dion, are you there?
Yes, I am. Good afternoon.
Excellent. Let me go ahead and make you the presenter.
There we go.
And great. And I can see your screen, so you are all set.
Excellent, excellent. Well, welcome everybody. We want to say thank you very much for joining us this week. Our goal is, as always, to answer as many of your questions, provide information. So do us a favor and take a few moments to go to the GoToWebinar control panel and enter in your question in the question area. Dave will be monitoring those, and we'll line those up and try and do our best to answer those. Also, just wanted to give you a heads up. We've gotten some good questions coming in. We really appreciate that, and we'll be working on those and being able to present them at our next meeting there. So for today, I have a quick demonstration, basically just to talk a little bit more about publishing, because we tend to get a lot of questions about that. And there's this one cool feature I really wanted to show everybody that could save you a lot of heartache. And so we'll go through that real quick. It'll only take about 5-10 minutes or so. Then we'll open it up for questions. So again, take the time to put your questions in. We love to hear those. And again, we always appreciate you coming and spending time with us this week. As I've done the last couple of weeks, I want to give everybody a heads up that we have the DEF CON coming up in just a matter of a couple of weeks. Please, there's a few spots left. Go ahead and go to the Alpha Software homepage, and there's a link there. In that, you can see the 2014 recap, and you can also register for this year's. It's action-packed. We've been reviewing the presentations that will be taking place, and there's just some phenomenal presentations. In fact, I was on a call this morning with our core Phonegap development group and our core mobile development group, and they have they're putting together a lot of really good presentations to help you take advantage of all the new capabilities and features. You will walk away knowing a lot more about how to use the existing technology, but also, more importantly, all the new features and capabilities that are really going to dramatically improve the development environment coming down the road. So again, go to the homepage of Alpha, check out the DEF CON link, and all the information is there, and we hope to see you at this upcoming event. So with that, first I want to check, coming through loud and clear, okay, Dave?
You sure are.
Good, good, thank you. So I wanted to spend a few moments today on a very popular subject, publishing. That's one of the core aspects of the system. Is everything looks fine and dandy on your local machine, but not really useful to people out in the real world. So that key step is to take that content that you've developed in your development environment and move it into a production system. So I'm first going to walk through real quick a little bit of a discussion of what that means. Basically, how development works is that within our development environment, we have the multiple ways for you to test your app. We have the ability to use working preview. You have the ability also to use what's called live preview, which gives you even more of a fidelity of it. You can also use remote, where you can actually use a mobile device and tap into your local development machine to exercise that through a local connection, say through your Wi-Fi. And also, if you want, you can actually generate a Phonegap and send it out there. But the key aspect is for you to start distributing your developed tool is to develop, which is basically publishing the information from your local environment to the Alpha application server, wherein then your clients, customers, etc., can then access that through the web, through HTTP, through their web browser. So this one key step here tends to give people a little bit of trouble until they get their hands on them and get their, kind of understand how to do that. And I want to spend just a few minutes showing a few of the key aspects on that. The core key element is your web project profiles. One thing I'd like to talk about, and I'm going to talk about a little more detail, is the fact that often you will have multiple production environments or sort of application server environments. You'll have situations where you'll have a validation environment, which could be on the same machine, but it has a different environment. So you'll be basically doing things in validation. You'll have a validation database. Then you'll have your production area, which has your production files and your production database. And what we see people set up is they do sort of a three-step process. First, they develop it on their local machine. They do the development work there. Then they publish it to the validation environment, expose it to a larger crowd. You can exercise it, make sure everything's great. And then once you're done with that, then you can publish it to your production environment, which then allows all of your regular day-to-day users there. And you want to set up that kind of control environment so that you don't have a situation where you accidentally publish something into development, which causes a problem. Maybe you publish it prematurely, or you've been using the same environment for validation and development. Often that's a very dangerous environment. So you want to kind of set up these different environments from there. And what I found is that before this new feature, which was added recently, which I'll show you right now, there were situations where you would have a validation environment and a production environment, and you would accidentally publish to the production environment when you meant to go to the validation environment. And that can be very disrupting because you're like, uh-oh, what do I do? Do I have to do I have a good backup of my production? You know, it can cause a little heartache. So with that, I want to show you this cool new feature that was added recently. So I'm going to jump over here. For people who are new to Alpha, this is our development environment. And within that, we have all the different components that make up our solution, things like A5W pages, HTML pages, web components, reports, etc. And again, as I talked about before, within here, let's go ahead and just, let's grab one of these things here. Let's go into here. We have the ability for you to use, say, working preview to preview your product. You can use live preview, which is still within the environment here, but gives you a little bit better definition of using the local browser. You can then click on a button up here and literally run this component right in your web browser. And again, now you're really cooking with gas because you're in the web browser environment. You start to see how it's going to actually look when people are using it out in the field. Then, of course, as I mentioned before, you can do what's called remote test, where in this case you can then put up a QR code, take your mobile device, zap it, and then it will work against this environment here or work against your development machine. But all of this takes place on your local development machine. When it comes time to expose it to the outside world, we need to use the publish button. And the publish button basically takes all of your changed files and it publishes it to another location. And there's a couple different ways to do it, but the one primarily people use is that it does a FTP transfer to a remote server where you, say, have it on ZebraHost or Amazon Web Services or Azure, it doesn't matter. You're going to move it off your development machine up to that server, and so you use the publish aspect here. And you have a lot of control over what you do. You can publish all the files, selected files, your current file. You can also tell it only to publish new and modified files. There's also other kind of parameters I'm not going to go through today, but you have a lot of control over that situation here. And the most important part is that you can have multiple publishing profiles that are available. So let me go back here real quick. Let me bring up another project real quick. And in this case, in this project, I have 3 profiles, and this is probably what most people will see. First one is local web root, which is where you'll publish to your local development machine. So you can actually run it sort of outside of the development environment, but running on your local machine there. Then often I will set up what's called a validation environment. This will usually be on the same machine up like on ZebraHost, again, on your external machine, but it has a different folder and a different database, and that's really critical because this validation environment is only used to kind of like do the testing and validating before you go to production. And then you'll have, in this case it's called that, but usually I'll call it production, which is then this points to a set of files and a database structure on your server that is for production. And this is kind of a normal setup for how and you can have more of them if you want. There's many different ways to handle it, but usually you have local web root, validation for doing validation testing, and finally the production environment where it happens to go for a production situation. Now, there's a situation that can occur, and now we have a way to handle this, is that after you set up these, sometimes you'll get fumble fingers. You'll go to say, okay, maybe it was set for local, and you go to hit validation, you accidentally hit the production environment, you hit publish. That is like a big no-no unless you're ready to do that, and that has happened more than once for me. And so what happens is you end up scrambling trying to cancel the publishing situation, and that can be concerning, and it's just stressful, and there's no reason to have to go through that. When you want to be able to say, okay, I'm going to go to validation, no problem, and you don't want to have an accident where you hit it, say, giant to the production environment. So I'm going to cancel out of here. I'm going to go up here to when I'm at the Web Projects Control Panel. Here is where I access those different profiles. So I click on that, and it brings up my profile window. And this is basically where I manage my different publishing profiles. The profile for sending it to local web root, my profile that sends it to the validation server, and my profile that goes to my production environment. And you'll notice that when I'm in validation, I can set up a different set of things like the FTP address for validation. And you'll notice here that I'm publishing it to a server into the A5 web root into a folder called validation. In this case, it's going to a different setup into a specific folder here. So it's putting it at a different location on the server there. At the same time also I can set up different alpha DAO connection strings where I can have a database pointed to a certain database on validation and then have it point to a different database on production. And that is super important because it allows and makes sure that we don't have a situation where we're pointed to the same database using like validation test data versus production database. Now, what I want to show you is there's this very, very powerful capability. It's called lock publish. So to prevent that accidental publishing to the incorrect place, now in the web project profiles, there's this little setting here called lock publish. And that is for each of your profiles. So you can set it on each of your profiles. And if I go here and I click on this drop-down box, you'll notice I can either do locked or locked with password. So let's go ahead and show this. I'm going to go ahead and say this is a locked profile. So I click OK. Now I'm doing my thing. I'm excited. Everything's going really good. And I go, oh, you know, it's time for me to publish to validation. And I go, instead of hitting validation, I hit my production environment and I hit publish. Watch what happens. It stops me. It prevents me from stopping there. So it's sort of protecting me from accidentally publishing to the incorrect location. So I can go, whoo, I dodged a bullet there. I can go ahead and say, yeah, I didn't want to do that. Or if I did want to do that, I can now go in and unlock that profile and set it up. So you'll notice that it's saying here that this profile has been locked. If I want to, I can go back into my profiles, go to here, take it off lock, hit OK, and now when I do the publish and go to there, it's not going to stop me. So, you know, the key thing there is I highly encourage anybody who's working with this environment who have set up a production to immediately go in and set the lock criteria just to save yourself some pain and anguish of accidentally publishing it there. Now, there's another method which is really powerful too. You can also say instead of just locked, locked with password, and this password I'm going to say is, let's call it David, for our friend Dave McCormick. Okay, so now I've set Giant Killer Demo to be locked but with password. So now when I go to publish, if I click there, I click publish, it's going to warn me and say, hey, you know what, this is a locked thing. Go ahead and give my password in here. I would put there and click OK, and then it would publish it up to the server. This is actually a little more convenient because then I don't have to stop, go and lock the profile and relock it. Up to you. The stop, go, and lock is really a good way of ensuring that it's never going to be published correct, to the incorrect spot. The benefit of this is that there are times when you want to publish to your production environment, and it's just a little easier to put in a password here to be able to do that. So you don't have to go through the rigmarole of going and unlocking a profile and then coming back in. Plus, you may forget to lock that profile later. So you may go, oh, okay, I'm going to unlock the profile, I do my publishing, then I should go back and relock it. In this case, you do it with theirs. So the way you access that is you go to the Profiles button, you go to the profile you want to lock, and you choose either lock or locked with password, set that up, and trust me, it will save you pain and anguish. There has been many number of times where I've accidentally published things to the wrong location. And where that comes into play even more importantly is, let's say I have a web component and I'm doing a bunch of changes and I'm putting it up on the web server. You're going to notice up here I have a button. When I'm actually in the component, I can actually publish this directly in there. And in this case, it's much easier to accidentally select an incorrect dropdown. You just move your mouse a little bit too much, and when you click there, it just starts publishing. It doesn't ask you anything. And so in this case, I'm going to go ahead and do a publish to my validation. So it's like, you know, if that was going to the production, it'd be like rut-row. But now I can sit there and say publish Giant Killer Demo. It stops me and says, do you really want to publish this to this profile? If I say yes, I go ahead and put in my password. And then, and by the way, nobody try and hack my accounts. David is not the password I use for other things, so don't get all smart on me. I've got a pretty smart crew out there, and they're pretty sneaky. So anyway, that said, but this is where I find it's really valuable because it's so easy to pick the wrong menu item and then be accidentally publishing to production. And you just, and if you notice, when I click here, it just immediately starts grabbing the files and pushing them up there. It doesn't give me any kind of confirmation. So I use that as a manner just to protect myself. So that's a quick and dirty introduction to what publishing is. We'll be spending more time talking about publishing, setting up the different profiles in future webinars. But I wanted to show people, especially for the experienced people, go in and start locking your profiles. It will just save you some time and energy. You know, it's just, you hate to waste even 10, 20, 30 minutes going out and fixing, unpublishing something, resetting the files, etc., because of a stupid error. So, you know, that stuff adds up. So locking goes a long way to make sure that the only time you publish is when you really want to publish to a server from that standpoint. So that's lock publishing. Check it out. It's really easy to set up, and trust me, both for experience and new people, it will save you a lot of pain and anguish and time down the road.
Excellent. So I'm looking through the questions, and we don't have many, so I would like to, there are a couple, but please, by all means, do type in your questions today. So, but we will start with the first one that we have. Not sure if you know this one, but we'll try to stump you here, Dion. The question is this. He said, in developing a mobile application using a list control, they're using a SQL table that has an encrypted field. Now, they have, and they want to display it decrypted when it's in the list. They said, I can see that if my list retrieves the data with a query, which includes the decrypt function, I could display the data in my app in a non-encrypted form, you know, so people can read it. What he's not sure about is, how do I allow the field to be edited or a new record to be added and have that information stored in encrypted form in the table when it's saved?
Oh, wow, that's a really good one. I have not spent a lot of time with table encryption, so I apologize, but I'm going to have to take that as I have to do a little research. So
okay.
You have a list, encrypt.
Yep.
And the question is how to
my SQL table, how do you edit it so that it goes back encrypted back into the table?
Encrypt upon save. Okay, so successfully able to read encrypted data, meaning pass it the information and get the encryption information. But the question now is, I've edited a field, and when I save it back into it, I need to understand how to encrypt it before it goes into the field and gets saved.
That's right. Excellent.
Okay, I'll have to take that as a research homework project. So.
Okay. Next question we have is an XML question. The person is familiar with the fact that we do XML parsing, that we can read an XML file. We have various functions for doing that, but they were wondering, how would you go about generating an XML file in Alpha Anywhere?
That's a really good question. I have, again, most of mine has been extracting XML file. I'm finding more and more people are starting to move to JSON, which has built-in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if I can see a situation where you need to be able to generate the XML and then send it to a third-party web service. Maybe that's the only type of information, like a SOAP service that requires XML there. I haven't found many things where I can say take a pointer variable and turn it into XML, because XML is kind of very arcane. So what I often do is there's a very powerful function in here, and let me see if I can find that one here. See, let's see, hold on here. I want to find this here. Okay, string translate. Wait, it's evaluate. There you go. Okay, I'm trying to find a little example. Okay, so this is going to be more code oriented, but this is how I would probably go after this kind of situation. So let me go ahead and I'm just going to show a little script here that I've done here. Okay, so bear with me. For the new folks, this is a little bit more arcane, but I use a function called evaluate string. Okay, and how this works is the following: is that first you dimension, you put in a variable, and this variable could be like extracted from the screen on an XBasic callback. So for instance, I have a variable called mySub, and then I'm putting a value of new test into mySub. Now I have now a string, essentially a string, and just to let you know, this is just say start string, end string, because I can put multiple lines in here and it treats it as one big string. So I can say, you know, next line here. Okay, so in here you'll notice with the JavaScript here that what happens is I've got the sort of my template of a string right here, and you'll notice in here I've put in this little curly brackets, mySub, which is the name of this this variable. And so then I run what's called evaluate string, and what that does is it takes this string, this information here, it looks for any of these little curly bracket things and says, oh, that's a variable, and it does a replacement. So think of it as a replacement algorithm. So what it's going to do is when this runs, it's going to take new test and put that in right here, whatever's in mySub there. So the way I would approach that, especially if the XML is very regular, meaning it's pretty similar, is that what you can do is you can paste into here your XML structure that you're going to pass to that other system. And then what you can do is go in and selectively replace and make that XML dynamic by putting in these variables here. So I don't have an example of XML here. Let's see, maybe we can find it real quick here. Small XML example string. Let's see if I'm doing this right. Okay. Okay, let's see. And XML can get very, okay, so here's a great example of an XML piece here. And it gets a little more complicated, but let's go ahead and use this. So I've copied this string out here. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to go like that, okay? So I've got this XML string in here. And I'm going to go ahead and modify this here so it looks a little nicer, okay? And this is just text, so I can, you know, edit it, modify it. It's just going to create it there. But you'll notice here I have this toString. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create dim2 as C, and I'm going to dim from as C, and I'm going to dim heading as C, and I'm going to dim body as C. I hope this is important, people, but bear with me here. 2 is equal to John Doe, from is equal from Jane Doe, and then heading here, and then body is equal to body here. Okay, now I've got that. So now what I'm going to go down in here, I'm going to go like this and say 2. So I'm going to substitute those items in here. So I've got 2 from heading, and then body is body. Okay. So let's make these all lowercase here. Okay. Now what I want to do is here is I'm going to say, let's see if this works.
Looks like there's a typo underneath too. You have from ROM.
Oh, Cool, thank you.
Up a little further.
From.
Yep, there you go.
There we go. Thank you. And then let's see if this works. Okay. So I'm going to save this as evaluate string test. Okay. So basically I've declared my variables. I then set the value of those variables. I now have my script, which is that XML, and I've gone in and selectively replaced where it had text before with that value. And let's go ahead and do this here. Notice what it did. It combined this evaluate string, took this template, and replaced it with those variables. So you notice we've got John Doe. So this is perfectly formed XML that can be sent out. So that is the way I would approach this, is that it takes a little bit more work, but you just understand what the XML string is, and then you do that from there. Now, there is a situation where XML where you may have multiple sub-items in here. For instance, it's not just a straight sort of setup. Maybe you have a variable set of sub-items. Well, you can use the same technique where you can go, okay, let's go sub-item is equal to item, let's go, bear with me, and okay, and then I can say for x equals 1, I might be going off the rails here, so bear with me. Okay. Let's see if this works. Okay, so the idea behind it is that I might have a situation where I have a variable number of sub-items that get put together with this, and so I can basically create this, I can use the same technique where I create a template for each of those sub-items. Let's say it's like you're sending an order in, and that order has line items. Each line item has a specific. So you kind of create the header, and then you generate the sub-items by using a technique very similar, and then you combine it all together and submit it. So it's a little hand crafting, but it works really well. So let's see. Oh, let's see. Message shocks. That didn't work. Why did that work? Oh, let's save this. I might have gone off the rails here. So let's see. JS equals there. Oh, might help to actually do that. So, so the idea would be new text plus CRLF. So let's give you an example of what that looks. So now you'll notice and I'll stop after this, but and for the folks, this is a little bit more arcane, but might be useful later on. Okay, so notice what it did here is that I created a essentially a template for each of those sub-items. Then I just basically ran this evaluate string over and over. So instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, this could be a line item with like a product number, a quantity, an order ID, etc. And then what I would do is just merge my top part with this to create the fully formed XML that I would submit into it. But that's really, I find, the most effective way, because often XML is pretty regular. Once you understand the structure, you can just do this substitute manner to create what you want to do. And again, all of these variables here maybe could be pulled from a database. They could be pulled from a user interface. It's all going to be the same kind of methodology. But I use this special little feature called evaluate string, which is very powerful because all it's going to do is take a string, look for these little curly brackets, look for a variable that's been set up and has a value for that, and do the substitution for you. So a little bit long-winded, but hopefully that gives you enough ammo to be able to dynamically create XML to send to systems or do something like that.
Excellent. So let me just go with a fairly short question. I'll just talk to you real quick, and then we'll go to, there are a couple which are a little bit more involved. I don't know if you know this one offhand, but do you know if there are any other plugins for barcode scanning other than the Phonegap and the Intel XDK?
No, those are the only ones I'm aware of that, and also ones that we've checked out. There may be other third parties, but not off the top of my head. And the nice thing is we've tested those and we know that those work, so those are pretty safe to implement with.
Great. Here's another question, which, okay, so this person wants to publish an edit form called My Details, and he wants to be able to be opened with a parameter so that each user gets their own value to enter the URL, such as, my value .a5w question mark employee ID equals 1234567. So
Gotcha.
how do you filter it so they're just looking at their one record using that trick,
Okay.
using the URL?
Great. Let me. I'll do a quick sample of that. So let's do this. First, I'm going to create a. Let's go in here. Let's go to web. Oh, got to be in demonstration. Okay. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a. And so again, just to make sure, they want to open an A5W page and then display a single form for editing?
That's right, a single form for editing, right?
Okay. Then what I would do is first is what you're going to set up is your form. So I'm going to click here and say I'm going to create a form. For the people who are new, the UX is our form builder. And what I'm going to do is create a data-bound form that allows you to pick up and edit a record. So I'm going to go in here, and what I'd like to do is just to use this, I'm going to use the customer table. So I have my connection to the database already set up, and in this case I'm going to select it to be, let's say it's customers. Where's customers? Okay. Gotcha. Okay. And then all fields here from that standpoint. Okay. So now what I've done is I've said, okay, I want to go ahead and have the system build this form with these fields, and it's just going to put those fields right in there for me, and it's going to build this form for me. So this is now my edit form for a single record, meaning I can display a single record in here and edit, and I can even show you what it might look like here. Okay, so you have your text you can fill out, etc. Very simplistic, nothing fancy, just straightforward there. Now, this is a data-bound form, meaning that this is data-bound to the back office system. So what I want to be able to do is when I open up this form, so I'm going to call this a single form UX, okay? And I'm going to go ahead and create a page that this lives in. So I'm going to create this page, and this page is going to be called single form, okay? So if I wanted to see this in operation, basically I've got my A5W page. Let's go to single form. Where is that? There we go. And I can open this up in the browser. So notice it has the embedded dialog there. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up in the browser and look at it there. And you'll notice something first is that, okay, so I've got my form. It's working there, but you'll know nothing is there because what we want to do now is dynamically load that form. So let's go back to the form here. So the first thing we want to do is go to data binding, and what we want to do the best is, I'm trying to think the easiest way to do this is we'll set an argument. Okay, so let me show you how to do this. So we have this form right here, and we want to look up a specific customer by their customer ID. So we're going to go into the properties here because we want to pass in a ID. In the case of the gentleman who asked the question, maybe it's a employee ID or something like that. And I'm going to find arguments, and I'm going to go to this argument here, and I'm going to say insert new argument that is called, we'll call it customer ID. Okay. So what an argument is think of it as sort of a global variable for the form. And then we can tell it, okay, we have this argument. How do we want to get this value of it? Do we want to set it at runtime or get the value from a variable? So let's go ahead and say we get it from a variable, and then the variable that we're going to use in this case is going to be customer ID, and this is going to be a page variable. And what a page variable is when you when you have an A5W page or an HTML, you pass parameters with the page variable. Okay, so what we have now is this. We have an argument that is automatically populated for me when the page opens up. It looks at the page variable and looks for the page variable customer ID and puts it into customer ID there. Okay, so we're still not there yet. We're getting close. So the next thing we need to do is we've set up the form. We've set up the argument where we can pass it a customer ID, and that's the critical element as we're passing in there. Now what we need to do is tell the form when you load up, first, get that variable, that argument, and secondly, go ahead and load data. So in that case, we need to go to the server-side environment to the onDialog initialize. This is the code that's going to run when this single form is opened up and run. So the first thing we need to do is grab that argument that we pass in. And there's a really cool little trick, and it's built into the text right here. If we go here to over here, there's a function that says customer, let's see, let's go ahead and go dim customer ID as C. Then I'm going to go customer ID is equal to, and I'll explain what this is in a moment. Okay. So what happens is when this form is run, it's going to go ahead and create a, just a holder for it. And then what it's going to do is look at the argument and say, hey, has the customer ID been set to an argument, i.e. if I passed it in? And if it does, then it puts it into customer ID. So this little piece of code right here basically looks at the state of those arguments and grabs whatever customer ID has been set to. Now that it's done that, we can now go to action scripting and say we want to populate a dialog with data from one or more tables. I click OK. And now what I do is read from a variable customer ID. Okay. So what this action JavaScript does is that given a customer ID, it will automatically go out, grab the data from the database that matches that customer ID, and then set up the form for us. So the trick here is that we set up an argument, we pass it in the customer ID, and then we use the value of that then to populate the data in the form from that standpoint. Okay, so let's go ahead and click Save. So if you'll notice, it's not working yet. So let's simulate this before we go forward. So I'm going to do a trick. I'm going to go customer ID is equal to alf key. Okay. So I'm not going to read the variable from the argument yet. I'm going to come to that in a few moments. But I want to show you that I set this customer ID to be that value. And then this populate dialog, it's going to take what that value is. So now let's try a working preview and check it out. Notice what happened here. Since I gave it a valid customer ID, this little piece of code, execute server action populate dialog, went to the database, searched for alf key as the customer ID, got that data, and then populated all the forms or all the fields on my form. So now let's go ahead and go back here and let's see if it all works. So the idea behind this is that instead of hard coding it, we want to read it from the arguments. And remember, let's go back here to our arguments. Customer ID is read from a page variable called customer ID. So let's go ahead and save that. Let's go ahead and see if this works here. I'm going to open this up and do a live preview. Now, notice that it doesn't have, it's not loading up that. So we need to have up here is, I think it's at customer ID is equal to alf key. Boom. Okay, let me walk you through that again real quickly because I might have gone a little fast there. So in our single form UX, when the form loads up, it's going to look for that argument. And that argument is then dictated by this argument, which gets it from a page variable, which is in HTML world, that's a little character set that's after the name of the page. Now this form UX is actually embedded in this page called single form. So when I sit there and click this execute page, it's going to open this up in live preview. And you'll notice something, it's blank. And the reason it's blank is that it looked for a page variable called customer ID. It didn't see one, so it blanked. And you would probably capture that and give the person a warning or something like that. But notice this is kind of arcane because I'm running it in a preview mode. But now what I want to do is I want to go up here and I go @ customer ID is equal to ALFKey. Okay, so I'm passing it in this URL a customer ID equal to ALFKey, and then I'm just going to hit return. So now what happens is when this dialog gets it, it says, oh, you know what? I found customer ID. That's called ALFKey. I'm going to put ALFKey in the argument, and then in here, it takes that argument value, puts it in this value, and then runs this populate dialog and does the right search. So it doesn't have to be just ALFKey. I'm trying to think. Bondi is another one, I think. So if we go back here and we just change this to be Bondi and hit return, it didn't find that record. Okay, so it gives me a warning because it didn't find that. I forget, do you guys know, anybody remember a name of a different client on there? I could open it up real quick. Sorry.
From Northwind?
Yeah, from Northwind. Okay, let me go into the database real quick. Look at this ASCII. Okay, and Anatar. Okay, that's really. So I'm going to go up here to ANATR, and boom, it finds the record, brings things up there. So that's how you would create a single-page form where you support it. And notice this is kind of an arcane thing here, but when you have it running, it's going to be, you know, giantkillerdemo.com/myform.a5w, and then I think it's, you know, not @ it's a question mark or something like that, and then it does there. So it's going to look a little better for when you, it's just because we're in live preview. But the trick is we pass it a page variable. That page variable goes into the argument, and then that argument is used to grab that data and pass it to there. And it works really good, handles all the pieces there. You definitely want to make sure that, for instance, what you can do is say if customer ID is equal to empty, then, and so then you can do something like here, you could show them a warning sign, or you could send them to a different page. You die gracefully instead of just saying, hey, no record found, in case they gave a bad, like they didn't include the customer ID in the page variables. So I hope that gives you enough ammo to be able to build what I think you want to build, which is a single form editing page where you pass it that code and into the you pass it essentially an ID value, and then use that ID value to populate it. So that's how you would do that.
Great, excellent. Okay, a couple other questions. One is about .NET. I don't know how much you've used .NET, but we'll try you out here at the end. Okay. So anyway, this person is using a .NET DLL, which he's using for doing encryption and decryption. But I think the question sort of applies to any .NET DLL. And the question is, how do you call a .NET function from a .NET DLL in your XBasic code?
Good question.
And a follow-up question, how could you use that to get the value and put it into a form field before it's saved? So that's
gotcha.
Okay. By the way, .NET is going to be covered quite extensively on the second day of the conference for those of you attending.
Okay, there's a great video on this, and I'm not going to show it here, that was shown kind of an overview of what you can do from that standpoint. But there's a specific, let me show you an example. I believe that it has it here. Basically, since we work on top of Windows, you can load the .NET library in from, I think this is just, okay. So here's the trick, here's the part. Since .NET is basically on the Windows server, XBasic can basically connect to it. So the code is basically you dimension a pointer variable that points to that library. So that function is going to be inside of one of many .NET libraries. So you have to figure out which .NET library is. But what you can do is once you've done this, i.e. SV as .NET dash and then the library it's in, then within there, you can basically call any of the functions that are in that .NET service. So the cool thing about that is that it basically now looks to XBasic like a regular function called XBasic, but it will take care of passing that over to the .NET library. So just look for Alpha 5.NET integration. But the neat thing about that is that it's very tightly integrated. It works really well. The speed is really good since it all takes place on the server. So the way I would handle that, let's say you want to encrypt, let's say we want on this right here. Let's go back to here. Let's say I want to encrypt the city code. So I have a button on here. Let's go down here. I'm going to call that button encrypt. Okay. So what I want to do is when I click this button, I want it to encrypt, put like say the city or whatever happens to be the region code. So what I would do is on the click event, I would add an action called an AJAX callback, and I'll call it do encryption. Okay. And I'll go ahead and put that there. Okay. Okay. So when I click this button, it's going to call that AJAX callback, and basically that calls the function over here. And so in this function right here, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say let's say region is equal to e.data submitted.region. Okay. So what this little line of code does is it pulls the value of the region text box, whatever that happens to be when this button is clicked. Okay. And then I can then do the encrypt function. Okay. And now set the user interface. Okay. And the way you do that is you use this little parameter right here. And I'll simulate it for right now. Basically, we say region.value equals encrypted. Okay, so let's go ahead and show you how this works real quick. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put in region some text right here, and then when I click encrypt, you'll notice that it made an AJAX callback, and then that callback sent back, and now the text encrypted. So again, when I click here, it sends a message back to the server, includes this data here, and then sends the encryption back to this field, and then I can just click this field or save this whole form into the database. Now, obviously this is hard-coded. In this case, what I would do is I would grab this, and this may not be the real code, but I say .NET. So let's say there's an encryption library. Okay. So now that I have a connection to the .NET library, I can then say new string is equal to sv.encrypt string, and I'm making this up, region. Okay. So the idea is I grab the information from the front end, put it into the variable region, then I define a connection to my .NET library, and again, this is not actually, but then once I have this SV here, I can then call any of the functions that are in that library, pass it the correct parameters, and in this case I'd have new string, and then say, then I would say, you know, set the value of eRegionValue value to that. So then it would pass it back to the front end, and it would take that encrypted string and then put it back into the field, and then that field could be stored in the database at that point in time. Again, I'm not sure the exact format of this function right here, but that's how I would do that from that standpoint.
Excellent. So we have a couple more questions before we run out of time, but I would like to just remind people that this session is being recorded. So if there's something that you saw today, you said, well, I'd like to know how to do that, but you know, you're not taking notes fast enough or something like that, you'll find it at videos.alphasoftware.com, usually posted within 2 days is usually the typical turnaround time. So it's usually up by Friday and you'll be able to find the other ones there as well. If you do have a question or you can't find a video, by all means, send a question to or your comment to guides, G-U-I-D-E-S, at alphasoftware.com. Okay, the next question we have has to do with a grid component. This person has a grid component with a detail view, and they want to be able to print the detail view information, nicely formatted onto a page. How would you go about doing that?
Okay, run that by me. I'm sorry.
Sure. Yeah, you weren't paying attention. I know how that goes, Dion.
I was thinking about the .NET stuff. I got to get my head out of the .NET stuff.
Okay.
Sorry.
So here it is.
Okay.
Person has a grid component with a detail view, and they want to be able to print data for the detail view onto a nicely formatted page.
Oh, okay. Cool. Excuse me. So the way I'd approach that is, let's go ahead and take an example. I think I have an example of that. Detail view. Let's see. Let me think if I have it in here. Let me try this. Okay. Okay. So notice I have a grid of customers, and then I have a button here that opens up the detail view. And in here I have a customer, or I have the details I can edit there. But I want to have a button in here that I can click that would do a pretty print of something along these lines. So the first thing I need to do is I'm going to go into my reports right here, and I'm going to create a new report, and I'm going to use the SQL data source. And I'm just going to use Quick Report for right now. Okay. And I'll go to the customers. And now, here's the tricky part. So I'm creating a customers report. And this customer report, I'm really only going to print one customer. So what I want to do is I'm going to define an argument for this report. And this argument is going to be customer ID. And that's the ID of the customer here. And the idea behind this, and I'm going to go ahead and say the default value is alpha key just so we have that for here. But the idea is that I am going to pass, this argument is something I'm going to pass in to this report. Okay. Now the important thing is that I have my customer table, have my argument. I'm going to click up here on the where clause and say customer ID is equal to, and then I'm going to insert the argument I just created. So basically what it's going to do is when this report runs, it's going to look at that argument, take that argument value, and then do a where, which will limit it just to that single customer. And that's very similar to what we just talked about in terms of passing a argument just to show a form with a single customer on there. Okay, so I can click, so I can do a preview record, click customer record, and you'll notice it didn't bring back there. What? Oh wait, make sure I did that right. How come it didn't bring back?
Wait, did you say not equal to?
Did I screw up? Oh, okay, wait. So let's go ahead and delete this here. Yes, you're right. I said customer ID is equal to, and you can now tell how I have so many problems with publishing. It's not the system, it's the pilot, kind of scenario. So I can preview this data with alpha key, and then there we go. Brings back 1. Now the rest of my report, I can go ahead and build it nicely. So I'm going to go ahead and just put things on there, and I'm going to, this is, what I would probably do is that this is kind of a columnar layout. I would then open this in the report editor and make it into a nice looking vertical portrait kind of report, but I'm going to hold off right now. So I'm going to call this customer single. Okay, so this is a customer. Okay, so we've got our report now saved there. Now I'm going to go back into my customer grid, and I'm going to go into my detail view. So again, remember what we had here is that we have a set of customers here, and I want to click on one, and then I want to put button on this detail view that's going to open up that report. So let's see if I can do that from here. So I'm going to go into the fields for the detail view. I'm going to insert a button. Okay. I'm going to call this pretty print. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and put that at the bottom, so it's down here at the bottom. Now I'm going to go to the on-click event for this button. and I'm going to go into Action JavaScript, and I have a Action JavaScript here called Open a Report Label or Print Layout. So what this Action JavaScript does is when the button is pushed, it's going to open a report. So I'm going to first tell it which report, and in this case it's customer single, the one I just created. Now you'll notice that since we built that report with a argument here, it's asking me what that argument could be, and now what I can do is I can say, before I open that report, I'm going to pass it an argument value. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on here, and the thing I want to pass it is customer ID. So what happens is when this button is clicked, the first thing it's going to do is look at the row or the detail record I'm in, get the customer ID, then it's going to call that report, and when it calls that report, it's going to pass it that customer ID into that argument, and then that argument is going to run accordingly. In the report, I use that argument to filter the report. Okay, and I'm just going to do it as HTML, and then I also want to, I could set it up as a tabbed UI pane, a panel, a div, but I'll just say window for right now. Okay. So again, I've got a button on here. It's on the detail view, so it's going to be on a single record. On the on-click event, I run the Action JavaScript, open a report. In that case, I pick the report. I bind the argument to the current customer ID, so I'm passing it to say, just give me that report, and that's how I do that. And so if everything works correctly, let's take a look at this. Let's see if it works. Okay. Okay, so let's go into here. Let's click Printing Print, and voila, Anton.
Very nice.
Let's say I want to do, let's say it's a route. And again, you can then make this as beautiful as you want to, and you have the functionality of printing it as a PDF, Excel, Word, etc. So that's how I would accomplish that, by adding a button that opens up basically a report that's bound to that data element to then show the proper item.
Excellent. Well, we have just a couple minutes left, so let me start with one, or end with one, which I think you'll be able to solve in a couple minutes. So we have a person here who has a field that's been defined as a tiny integer, and they're using it in a grid component. And one of the field properties is treat the field as a logical field. So I don't know with that. It says now he expects the grid to show that as a checkbox, but instead it's showing as the words true or false. Do you know how to get it to show as a checkbox?
Well, the first thing you have to do is make sure your control type is set. So as you'll notice here, it's set as that, but if I go down and click it as checkbox, now it will display in the grid as a checkbox. And this is, again, if it looks at its tiny end, then it's going to say treat it as logical, and then it's going to either be checked or unchecked. So just make sure your control type for the item you want to display is set to checkbox, and then also set that treat tiny end as a logical value, and that should solve that for there.
Great. And if we could just go back to the XML question again.
Sure.
Just in your example, you were using French braces or curly brackets. They're also called. Were those being used as placeholders? Can you sort of explain how that worked?
Yeah, let me go back to that real quick. Where's my code here? I hope I saved it. Nope. Oh, there it is. Test. Bear with me. Okay. Oh, cool. I had some XML there. Oh, I'm in the wrong project. I think I was doing that in this project. Sorry, jumping around on you there. Let's go to Control Panel, Code. There we are. Okay. So I've got my variables. Then I have I call it template text. And the nomenclature is open curly bracket, the variable name, close curly bracket. So in case heading, from, body, etc. So when this evaluate string runs, it looks through this template text. It says, oh, I found an open curly bracket. I read to the end of the call, pulls out that 2, and then it says, do I have a variable that's already been established? If it does, it then does the substitution in that case. So, it's the curly brackets are what it.
Excellent. And if you wanted to actually use curly brackets in your string, how do you escape that? So
that's an interesting problem. What I've had to do there is there's another, it's called stringtran.
Okay.
Okay. And what I do is this is a nice one because it does it, but I use another technique. Let me go ahead and show you what that looks like, is that sometimes there are like text where you have curly brackets in it, and it confuses it. So what I do is I create my own curly bracket structure. So notice I have like dual curly brackets, and then I do this thing called I think it's a string underscore tran. Let me find the exact one here. Alpha 5. There it is, string tran function. And it's very similar to that. Is basically what you can do is this is my JS, then I look for that 2, and then I put in here my variable 2. Okay, so this takes a little bit more work, but the nice thing about it is that if you do have a situation where you have curly brackets and other things that are already in the template, it can confuse evaluate string. Basically what you can do is you create a template, you use the double curly brackets. It can be anything you want. They could be pipe characters, whatever you want to. But then what I do is call a stringtran. All that does is it says, look for this combination in this template and substitute it with that variable name. And so I do that. It's a little more work. Notice that I'd have to do that for each of my of my variables.
Right.
Whereas the nice thing about for evaluate string, it just goes through and does that automatically. So that's a way around it if you have these, the curly brackets in your template that you need that are not associated with creating a variable replacement.
Oh, that's great. Well, we're actually over time, so I want to thank you, Dion, for presenting. I want to thank everyone who asked questions and who showed up today. We appreciate your time, and we enjoy doing these webinars. Our next webinar will be on Wednesday, and then we're going to be taking a break for our conference. But if you have questions, I know we have a couple of them today that we didn't get to that we'll look into, but if you have other questions, please send them to guides, G-U-I-D-E-S, at alphasoftware.com. Thank you very much for attending. We hope to see you at a future webinar. Take care and goodbye.